Good afternoon and thank you for joining us. We will be starting shortly. Hello and thank you for joining us. We're just going to allow a few more participants to join and we will start soon. Okay, I think we will now get started. So hello and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining this, the second of our Autumn in Conversation With events, a series of one-on-one discussions where we interview recognised and celebrated individuals who are of direct interest to our members. On behalf of the CLA, I am delighted to welcome you to what I am sure will be an informative event. My name is Anne Maidment, and I am the Regional Director for the Southwest. We are fortunate today that today's discussion will bring together our CLA President Mark Bridgeman with Rebecca Pow, Minister for the Environment. Re-elected as Member of Parliament in 2017, Taunton Deane has been Rebecca's home for 27 years. Coming from a long line of Somerset farmers, Rebecca is no stranger to rural matters. A scientist by training and rural reporter, Rebecca's experience is also in PR and communications. Rebecca is currently co-opted onto the CLA Somerset Branch Committee and is well known in our region to the membership. Appointed as Minister for the Environment in 2019, alongside other matters, Rebecca is responsible for the delivery of the 25-year Environment Plan, the imminent Environment Bill, and DEFRA's input into climate change adaptation, land use, and net zero. Mark will discuss with Rebecca the changes that will affect our rural businesses, how we can plan, and where are the risks and opportunities. Rebecca, you are very welcome, and I'm sure that this subject will be of much interest to those watching. I should remind the audience that today's session is being recorded for future use, including availability to other members, and will be available on our website after the event. The format for this event, as previously, is that your microphones and videos will remain turned off. Mark will have a discussion with Rebecca, after which he will pose questions that you will ask. Please do feel free to ask questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and Mark will attempt to cover as many as possible. Thank you, and I will now hand you over to Mark and Rebecca.
Thank you, Anne, very much.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. I just thought perhaps we could start off after Anne's introduction, just to really get your view on where you see your priorities in your role as Environment Minister, and what, when we look back in years to come, what you hope your legacy will be in your role as Environment Minister.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark, and thank you very much for inviting me to this in conversation session. And it is a shame we can't do it in person, but and hello to everybody on the call, many of whom I think I probably know, which is always nice. And you asked me about my priorities. Well, as the introduction said, I come from a very rural background, which totally interlinked farming and agriculture with the environment, which was my training, and then consequently went on in my career to completely integrate the two, agriculture and the environment. So I've never seen them as separate. So I think one of my legacies I would like to leave, and I'm so delighted to have reached this position, and honoured indeed that Boris asked me to be his Environment Minister. I think what I'd like one of my legacies to be that we completely interlink these two things for all future time. And in my role in the department, I obviously have all sorts of things under my particular portfolio, but I am working now probably closer than ever with the others in the team, with the Farm Minister, Victoria Prentice, who I think you've also had on this session, and also indeed with the Secretary of State, and the Lord Zach Goldsmith and Lord Gardner. And I think if we're really going to put the environment, land, farming, everything in all its many guises, this is what we need to do very strongly. And so that's a sort of overarching thing. But there are lots of other things that are my priorities, because when you go into a department, they always say, Minister, what are your priorities? And one of them particularly is soil. This might sound strange, but I did do the first ever debate in the UK Parliament on, in the English Parliament, on soil, and instigating an inquiry through the Environment Audit Select Committee. And strangely, although the people on it couldn't quite comprehend why we were discussing it, at the end of it, they said this is probably one of the most interesting inquiries we've ever done. And of course, because soil degradation is so costly, it costs about 1.4 or 1.6 billion a year in soil literally washed away, but also in carbon lost from soil. So I'm really pleased that we've now got that on the agenda and managed to get that included in the Ag Bill, as working on soil and delivering soil health will potentially be one of the public goods that we can go forward and do a lot of work on. So that's another priority. Another priority is water. I expect people will ask me questions about water today, and what's happening to our rivers and our water quality. And whilst, yes, our rivers have improved a great deal over the last decades, there's a huge long way to go. And that is another of my priorities, and things like chalk streams will be interlinked into that. So I've got oodles of other priorities like plastics and other parts of my portfolio, but they're probably not of so much interest to today's audience. So should we start with those, Mark?
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, maybe just picking up on the soil, and I think what you say about integrating agriculture and environment certainly will resonate with CLA members and our view policy-wise. But on the soil point, and I know it's a passion of yours and it's on the face of the bill, or the soon-to-be Act. How do you see that working in practice? Because it's very easy, it's great, you read all the books about soil and it all makes sense, but it's complex. How do you see it working in practice in Elms going forward? What are your thoughts on it?
Yes, well, there are a number of ways to go at it. One of which, of course, one of the main delivery mechanisms of that overall blanket recovery of soil. And of course, lots of farmers and landowners already do great work in this space, but we need to get everybody to do it. So, one of the options is that within some of the phases of the new agricultural programme, that soil is one of the public goods, and so farmers are potentially paid to do things like min tillage, which lots of them do already, do more continuous cover, really look at what we do, for example, with maize, tree planting will all be part of it. So there'll be a raft of measures. We've also got our peat strategy and peat restoration, because that again it is a soil, so peat restoration, so that it's eventually gets much closer to its natural state, which involves re-wetting. That will stop release of carbon. So there are many ways of going about this. Also, indeed, working on a wide scale, on a catchment scale, potentially with other partners, for example, water companies, who are all going to be looking at ways that they can help to improve their water quality. And again, if you look after your soil and the soil holds the water, it has a double function, doesn't it, of holding water. It also helps to clean it. So there are lots of ways that we will go about it. But I think the fact that it's getting attention and is a priority will mean that we will address it in the way that we need to.
Yeah, good. Your colleague Victoria Prentice has just taken the agricultural bill through the House, and you're about to, or soon, you will be responsible for taking the environment bill through, which has been delayed for all sorts of reasons we know. Perhaps you could just explain to us how you feel it fits with the agricultural bill, and also give us a sort of update on where you see the sort of timings are.
Yes. Well, first of all, just deal with the timings. It's coming back really soon. We've actually got what is now called an out date by the time, which is the time it has to be through the House of Commons anyway. And that out date is December the 1st. And given it's going to take 6 weeks in committee, round and or about, you can calculate that for yourselves. But a lot of work's gone on. And obviously it went into committee stage, it had its first reading, second reading, went into the committee stage, which is where you thrash out, line by line, the detail of the bill, and any amendments get discussed. And it got delayed, of course, because of the lockdown and the coronavirus pandemic. But a lot of work has continued on it over that period. And in a way, that's been pretty constructive, because one of the things that we've been able to work on more is something called due diligence, which is about our global footprint, which many people were very keen, as indeed was I, that we tried to get into the bill, and we've been able to work on. That's just one example on that. And then you asked me how it fits with the agriculture bill. Well, it fits incredibly closely, and I was there to support Minister Prentice this week as she took the agriculture bill through, and she actually highlighted this in her speech as well in the chamber, in that we can't deliver all the things that the environment bill is set to deliver if we don't work with the measures in the agriculture bill. And so one of the overarching aim of the bill is to improve the environment in all of its myriad shapes and forms, and to make that a priority. And within it, there are 4 sections: air, nature, water and waste, and resources. And each of those sections will have to set a legally binding target. And within it, then we can set a raft of other targets. So, for example, there will be a biodiversity target. And the way that we will actually achieve this target, i.e. have more nature, we'll be working with landowners, like the people on your call. Landowners and farmers who own 70% of our land, or work 70% of the land. Absolutely crucial that we work together, and the measures, the delivering of public goods through the agricultural bill, whether it's flood protection or sustainable food or all of the raft of measures, will come through the levers put in there through the agriculture bill. So there's a really, really close thing. And the delivery of biodiversity net gain, which is one of the measures, one of the really important measures in the environment bill, whereby any development has to put back 10% more biodiversity than was there in the first place. And that's where we will have to work with landowners and farmers and people who have the land to find out where to put it. So there's lots of other ways I'm sure we'll talk about them in a minute, where the 2 bills work together. Yeah,
I mean, picking up on that biodiversity net gain, certainly it's something the CLA has been promoting as an idea for many years. We think it's a great opportunity. From your side, and we see the opportunities. One of our concerns is about where that takes place, and I think there's a priority within DEFRA that it should be within the development itself, where in reality you can make a development green and you can make it a nice built environment, but ultimately for real biodiversity net gain, it needs to be done in a sort of aside from a particular development. Where do you see the opportunities for landowners and farmers in that biodiversity net gain sphere?
Yes, well, you touched on an interesting subject. Obviously, there will be a proviso in favour of making our development as green as possible. And after all, Boris is very much focusing, as are we all, on a green recovery from coronavirus. So that's highlighted that more than ever. And so where possible, the net gain will be within the development, but where it's not possible, it will be somewhere else, which is where the landowners and the farmers will come in. But also, the 10% is the minimum. So there could be a lot more than that. And of course, we've also got our tree strategy and our ambition to plant a lot of trees. So that a lot of that will have to be in big chunks, not itsy bitsy around a few houses. So I think there are huge opportunities to work with those who work the land and own the land to bring forward this net gain measure. And also within the Environment Bill too, will be a requirement to come up with what are called nature recovery strategies and local nature recovery strategies, which are basically plans of what's where, so that will help to inform us where we need to improve the nature and biodiversity, and to have some more focus about where we should be focusing our attention.
Another new concept that's coming forward in the bill is the idea of conservation covenants, which I don't believe exist in this country, but obviously do in America and many other countries around the world. How do you see those working most effectively? And sort of linked to that, the issue of timescale. I was on a biodiversity, the CLA has been running a biodiversity net gain series actually the last few weeks for our members, and one of the comments came up about it would be for in perpetuity, which is a strange concept given the world, given with climate change, you can't keep something in perpetuity by very its nature. I just wondered what your thoughts were about how that would work effectively.
No, obviously we'd be very interested to hear the feedback from your roundtables. You mentioned that to me before. What the conservation covenants are another measure being brought forward in the Environment Bill, and yes, we've sort of been advised and we've learned a lot from what they do in other countries. And what will happen is it will be an agreement between a landowner and a designated responsible body. That might be a conservation charity, wildlife trust, or a public body, and the idea will be that between them they come up with how much land they want to put into the covenant, but it's not in perpetuity. They will also agree how long it will be for, and then they will set up the covenant, and it can be related to nature, also heritage and features. So it's very much a voluntary agreement, but it's made for the public good.
Okay. I'd like to sort of move on to you mentioned trees, and I know you're responsible for all areas of adaptation and DEFRA's thinking on climate change. Hugely ambitious targets from the government at the time of the election, as there were from it was an arms race of planting ambitions. Actually, CLA had a forestry conference yesterday, and much of the discussion was around how we actually achieve these very ambitious targets, because we've got these huge targets, 30,000 across the UK, but 10,000 in England, but we're only probably planting just over 2,000 at the moment. So where we haven't, there's a lot of talk about the detail. When do you see the big targets, the detail coming forward, and who, as I see it from where I'm sitting, there's quite a lot of the ministerial team. It sort of touches on various portfolios. Whose neck is on the line, if you, as it were, at the end of this Parliament, at the end of 24, as to whether or not you've achieved the goals?
I know. Well, my neck was on the line this morning, because in the chamber I had to take the questions on trees, but it's really Lord Goldsmith's portfolio. Right. But of course he can't answer the questions in our chamber. But you're absolutely right in that although the tree strategy comes under Lord Goldsmith's hat, we work really closely together, because there are a whole range of measures by which we hope to deliver these trees, and an awful lot of focus and engagement has gone into this. So we have published our we consulted through our tree strategy, so we've gathered in loads of data on that, and we'll be publishing that shortly. But we also work, because of course, just to touch on some of the measures, there obviously will be opportunities in the new land management scheme for tree planting as a public good. And there's a lot of interest in, for example, planting along river corridors. That's one much discussed option, but it would be as a public good, so the farmers would get paid for delivering the trees. There are also opportunities through my flooding hat, with my flooding hat on, through nature-based solutions to flooding and slowing the flow, and working with a range of partners, with some of the, obviously the DEFRA government flooding money, but also leveraging other money from water companies again, and other partners, and a certain amount of tree planting will happen through that. And we also have our Nature for Climate Fund, which is very much for tree planting. And so there's a whole range of those measures. And then also we've also got we recognise that the market and the woodland carbon guarantee are really important levers, really, and that those I see playing an increasingly important role. And that's where obviously we'd like to work with your members on those schemes, and how we can improve them, so that we can actually, because obviously the problem with trees is that you can't see any instant return, and you need to be guaranteed a price to encourage you to go into them, wholesale on a large scale. So that will leveraging in the private sector in that way will be an important part of how we're going forward. But you are right, and you will hear a lot more detail. We keep saying shortly, but it really will be soon, because we've got to get a move on and plant these trees for a whole range of reasons, not least, trying to address climate change.
Yeah. Okay. So just keeping on the theme of climate change, as was mentioned earlier, you're responsible within DEFRA for the input into the whole net zero agenda. And I wondered if we could just talk about what that means, the land use change, and where do you see farmers, and what do you think farmers and landowners can do now, the next couple of years, next 2 to 3 years? We're going to have elms at the end of 2024, but what do you think as a sector we need to be doing now?
Well, it's a good day to be talking about this, because it's the day that the government response to the Committee on Climate Change's 2020 report has been published, sort of highlighting our progress towards net zero, and what efforts we've made, and our new commitments, which are included in that, are to publish a net zero strategy in detail, and also a government biomass strategy. And that's something that I know your members will potentially be interested in, this whole issue of biomass. And you are right in that agriculture and that whole sector, actually, in terms of what all the different sectors have done, if you're dividing up, in industry, shipping, airlines, whatever, agriculture still has to do more. And biomass is one area being looked at, and other areas are emissions, for example, from ammonia. So that's just on a practical level, looking at slurry pits, slurry covers. How do you stop the gases being emitted? Improving innovation, technology, science in terms of our livestock. I know a lot of work's going on that already, in terms of their diets and the gases they emit. So all of these come under the hat of agriculture, but also so does the things I've mentioned before. The soil management and health is part of it, to stop the carbon release, the peat restoration, the tree planting, the nature-based solutions, and lots of them have multifarious benefits in terms of, yes, they can stop emissions, but also they can hold in emissions. But at the same time, lots of them can improve biodiversity as well, because it's climate change adaptation that comes under me. Mitigation comes under BAYES, and adaptation comes under DEFRA. But that means we still have to work really closely together, because something you'll appreciate is It's all about balance. So, for example, say bays were keen on increasing anaerobic digestion for energy purposes. We then have to consider, what about the digestate that's produced? That's a great fertilizer, but it's not so hot when it runs off into the water. So you might solve one problem, but we're really mindful in DEFRA, because we're adaptation, what the knock-on effects of it might be. So, but certainly the land is a key to a lot of what we've done. A lot of the easy stuff on climate change, and we've got to tackle some more of it. But lots of our measures in the bills that we've talked about are designed to help tackle these things.
And there's some very, very ambitious, in the Climate Change Committee's report, the land use work, some really ambitious targets for how land will be used differently over time. Trees is just one of them. But do you think those targets are realistic? Do you think these are aspirations, or how will the government, lead us in that direction, as it were? Or do you think it will evolve over time?
We've already committed, haven't we, to net zero? We were the first government, in the G7 to do that, and we do see ourselves as leaders in this. And although that might seem really tough, at the end of the day, there will be spin-offs if we get it right, because we'll be more sustainable. But it's also not just about us, is it? It's about also what our neighbours do, and then that's why the global footprint is also so important. But we're very ambitious on this, and actually the public, there's a lot of public support for what we're doing, and indeed the science tells us we must do it.
And just coming back to where we started on this point, we talked about soil, we talked about organic matter, the importance of that. How do you see there's a sort of there's a bit of a tension between, some people say, well, we've just got to plant lots more trees, and other people will say, well, we just need to improve our soil organic matter, we need to manage our grasslands and our arable better, and that will make a huge difference. Where are you on that, or do you think it's more nuanced than that?
All of those things will be really important, and a lot of them are just degrees of influencing climate change. But what they all do a lot of is improve biodiversity. And that is the two sides of the coin. That's the twin crisis we're facing, and we must do that. And the knock-on effects, will affect everything: our air, our water, our food, and it's just all a matter of balance. And every farmer won't do every one of those things, but they will choose which things they prefer to do, or indeed which are most important in their particular area. If they're for example, working on a catchment basis together, there'll be certain priorities. If, for example, you're in a chalk stream area, that you'll have particular priorities. But all of these measures, we're going to have to do all of these measures.
I think certainly our view is that if you look through one dimensional lens on just carbon, you do one thing, and if you just look for biodiversity, you do another, or food. And it's got to be much more integrated if we're going to tackle all these things. A final sort of area I wanted to just explore before we opened up for questions, and that was wearing your hat as for Environment Agency and water and flooding and the water strategy. And we've seen some very big government announcements about capital expenditure, in this area as in many other areas. But the pushback that we always get from our members on the ground is it's great having these big capital commitments, but actually the day-to-day annual management stuff, the maintenance, the permitting is just not happening. And we see this time and time again. I give you as the agency is under huge pressure because of resources, and it's pulled from the next one crisis to the next. And the opportunity to work with private landowners, IDBs, to solve problems, often in a much more cost-effective way and quicker and more pragmatic way. I'll just give you one illustrative example. One of our members is the Elmley National Nature Reserve, one of the real sort of fantastic nature reserves in the country. And they've got flood defences there and working, and the Environment Agency have been incredibly slow, and they would have been able to come forward, deal with the issue, and move on, but as a result of time delays and bureaucracy, it's costing multiple times more money. And the ability to work with private landowners who often are not allowed to interfere. How do you see we can solve some of these problems? Because there is, you're not going to have an unlimited budget. These agencies aren't going to have an unlimited budget, but we need these to resolve some of these issues more quickly.
Well, it's really interesting. And in any cases you have, it is definitely always worth, obviously try and sort it out yourselves locally or regionally.
Yeah.
But, we do like to hear about these things because we want it to function correctly. And of course, it is a very large organisation, the Environment Agency, and it has an awful lot of demands on it. And certainly over these last few months, it's been drawn into the coronavirus issues, just like everybody else. But we're certainly in the Environment Bill, we've got measures to set up IDBs, more easily and quickly, because they do serve a very useful purpose. And certainly that partnership working, especially on floods, is something that we're very pro with our local flood resilience forums and everybody working together. And in fact, you touched on a good point, because, for example, we've recently the River Severn catchment has received some funding from government, and all of those, for example, MPs have come together all up and down the river, and they are joining forces in a big partnership with the EA, with Natural England, with all the local authorities and all of these bodies to work on, I think, issues that you're suggesting. And I do think that's got to be part of the way forward, because you just simply can't expect government to do it all, or even to provide all the money, although actually we've more than doubled our flooding budget. That's 5.2 billion in the next tranche, in the next 6 years tranche, so it is large. But even in our new flood policy statement, which the Secretary of State and I worked together over many months with all of our stakeholders and our officials on, it's quite different, and I hope improved from the last one, because it is much more about these things that you're suggesting, and partnerships, and a new holistic approach to the way we deal with lots of these issues connected with flooding and indeed the wider water landscape. So it is a change.
Okay. Minister, I've dominated the questions, and I've got a lot of questions coming in from our members. So I'm going to bounce around, pick out some interesting questions, if that's okay. Perhaps to start off, and to say they're coming in, so I'm not quite Dimbleby in this, but some interesting questions about the Prime Minister's recent announcement about 30%, what was it, 30 by 30, 30% of England will be protected for biodiversity. And we've had a couple of questions, one from Anne Wilcox that I'll read out, and one from Andrew Baker. I'm just interested in your thoughts. 1 second.
Okay,
so Anne asks, Boris has promised an extra 400,000 hectares of English countryside will be protected to support the recovery of nature. Will this be the creation of additional AONBs or national parks? And how will this fit with the requirement for more housing and for the planning for the future, with a suggestion of designating all land under the growth, renewal and protected? This may well impact on land prices and land availability. How will we achieve everything? So, it's this, he's come out with this bold statement. What does it actually mean on the ground in practice? Because we've already got, I think it's 26% is designated, but that doesn't necessarily, people farm and run businesses in that. It doesn't mean to say it's a museum.
No. Yes, he did make this announcement. It was partly linked to the fact that we've already signed up to an ambition to protect 30% of our seas. That's globally. It's a big global initiative, and this is a similar initiative for land. And actually, the reason for committing to something like this is actually to drive the global agenda as well, to get other countries also to help with this, addressing nature, the crisis in nature. And yes, we've already got about 26% of our land in national parks and AONBs, although there's still plenty of work to do there, particularly in our triple SIs, to get them into favourable condition. That's a real focus. And then other protected areas, we're still exploring exactly where this land will be allocated, and a lot of it will link to that Glover review that many of you will know. And she did a very interesting review of our protected areas with a lot of recommendations, which are being very closely looked at. But also a lot of our new, again, frameworks that I've discussed already about the trees that we're going to plant, the biodiversity net gain and the conservation covenants, all of those will help to get us that extra 4% of land. Okay.
A sort of big picture question, wearing your, as the Environment Minister from, and I've had quite a few come in from him, but just to, I think, probably summarise the message from Oliver Harwood. We've got one here. Thank you. What a day to have the Environment Minister, in brackets, today. Highways England, I didn't know this, announced another 5 miles of dual carriageway, destroying 3 villages and red list species at Arundel, as well as adding 250,000 tonnes of CO2. And then a question about, really a number of questions around the huge multi-billion-pound road building initiative, and how is it consistent with the Build Back Better, green recovery, climate change agenda, and all of those things. There's that tension within government. And as Environment Minister, what's your?
It's all about balance. And even in my own constituency, the A358, we've never stopped talking about trying to get it dualled, because of course there is this need for connectivity, whether it's north south or east west, which is all linked to the economy. But there's very much a proviso in government that the environment has to be taken into account. And once we get our environment bill through, that will be even more the case. And there is a demand for green infrastructure. And indeed, we're working incredibly closely with the Department of Transport, who have released billions of pounds over the last year or so to get that shift to more environmentally friendly vehicles, electric charging hubs, cleaner buses, cleaner vehicles. So all of that is also part of what the Department of Transport do and where we interlink. But we still got to move the economy forward. So it's all part of this whole balance that we work to. As Oliver, who has emailed in, will know. Yeah.
Okay. Changing the subject you mentioned chalk streams a number of times, or a couple of times in your discussion, and as it happens, I've got a question that has come in here from Alan Woods. Chalk streams are dear to the hearts of many CLA members who farm alongside them and or fish their waters, yet unsustainable abstraction by water companies is destroying these internationally rare natural assets. Can the Minister offer us any hope of getting the water companies to reduce abstraction at source so that chalk springs can once again enjoy near natural flows?
Another subject dear to my heart. Yeah, because the UK, I think, has something like 80% of the world's chalk streams. They're absolutely precious habitat. I think that's right, isn't it, Mark? Really precious habitats, and it is something I'm making something of a priority. And that's not to say it's straightforward, no. But there has been unsustainable abstraction, and a certain amount is already being done, but a great deal more needs to be done. And actually, I called all the water companies together recently to highlight this, and the Secretary of State is also having a similar meeting, all about stressing the need to address this further, to have a much stronger catchment focus. That will help to a degree. Also, a certain amount of water has already been returned to the environment in some of the measures taken in terms of modernising the licensing system for abstraction, underutilised licences or unused licences. But there's a great deal more to do on that, and there are some measures in the Environment Bill that will help. But also, I'm actually very timely. I'm speaking at a chalk stream conference tomorrow, which I've agreed to do because I do seriously think this is so important we have to address it, and we have to work with the water companies to do that, but also the farmers and the landowners, because they also have all their abstraction licenses, and the fishermen. We have to work with everybody if we really are going to make a difference to this, and we do have to, because it's such precious habitat.
Well, it's great that it's such a priority of yours, so thank you. Move on to, so we're jumping around a bit, but there's very interesting questions here. This is a question from Charles, Duke of Wellington. Please may I ask about the government's policy on pesticide use? So where do you see, I guess filling in on that is, with elms, what do you see the, the direction of travel?
Yeah, good afternoon, the Duke of Wellington. We work very closely together to restore our Wellington monuments. It's going very well, Charles. Believe it or not, the National Trust kept the work going with all these really specialist craftsmen, stonemasons, throughout the whole lockdown. I could talk to you for the whole time about the Wellington Monument, but you probably don't want me to, Mark. The question was about pesticides, which isn't my portfolio. That is Victoria Prentice. But under the ELMS, the new agricultural scheme, there will be an emphasis on what we're calling integrated pest management, i.e. a much more focused use of, where they are used, of pesticides, and technology and science, obviously, really important part of it. And so there'll be an increased focus on science, and also on only using them when they're absolutely necessary. And when we talk about our soil health and all of those measures, farmers will be very closely focusing on what they're doing, and what pesticides and chemicals they use, and whether there are other biocontrols that could be usefully utilised in the place of what we call pesticides.
Well, I hope perhaps with elms, if it's deemed to be a public good to reduce pesticide use, that it's incentivized through the elms system.
Yeah.
Another question from Ollie. I haven't got a surname here. What's the minister's views of a carbon tax? Big question.
You mean for the woodland carbon tax you're talking about?
No. I think this is a much bigger question, which is, if you go to the supermarket and you buy something that we talk about carbon a lot, we talk about net zero, but really to fully understand it, or to fully price it, we have to fully cost it, and what the cost, so that steak, that beef from Brazil, what's its true carbon impact?
No, this is interesting.
It's the Dieter Helm vision, if you like.
Well, that actually goes back to that pesticide question. I had a conversation with a farmer on Saturday, who was full of why he couldn't use less pesticide because he produced less food and la-di-da-di-da. And I said, but what if you had to pay to take that chemical out of the water? What if that was factored into the cost of your food that you sold? And it's exactly the same thing, isn't it? It's like your footprint, and it's something that increasingly will be factored in. And I won't talk about it necessarily in terms of carbon, but in our waste and resources strategy, we are moving towards what's called a circular economy, and that is where manufacturers of a product will have to consider where that product ends up and what happens to it. So they will be responsible for the cost of all those other things that happen to the product. This is in particular will affect packaging first, but half of all our plastics are used in packaging. That's why we're focusing on that first in the Environment Bill, bringing forward some of the things in our resources strategy. But it's exactly the same argument. It's basically about moving towards a circular everything, isn't it? And so eventually all of these things, if we're really going to have a sustainable planet, will need to be factored in.
Well, a little plug which we'll get later, for our CLA Rural Business Week that we're doing. We're having a whole day on net zero and climate change, and Dieter Helm speaking, and some practical examples. So will be a plug about that at the end of the this session.
Good.
We've got a just jumping around again. This is from just some initials here. In the pursuit of the drive for green energy, what's your view on large solar parks being built on viable farmland and the loss of that land to brownfield sites forever? And obviously, I see them getting on the train up to Northumberland. They're getting bigger and bigger. I've seen some plans for some really, really large scale ones. What's yours and the government's view on these very large scale solar parks?
Well, I mean, you do know that the government has a drive towards renewable energy, towards phasing out fossil fuel. We've phased out coal-fired power stations. This is all linked to getting our emissions down, to climate change, all of that. And so we have moved towards more renewable energies, and solar panels are one of them. And now there's a great deal of emphasis being put on offshore wind. So the point is, yet again, it's all about balance. It's all about balancing what the needs are of the nation and how best to get them. And if we're moving to a green trajectory, it's a mixture of things. And solar panels are one of those things. But also you can get tremendous bee habitats under your solar panels, and you can also graze sheep.
Okay, so this comes back to sort of, I guess it sort of links to biodiversity question here from Charles. I worry that most of the discussion is about additionality. I have approximately 20% tree and hedgerow cover, leading to very high fixed costs. I can't compete with large-scale arable farmers. Will existing environmental delivery be rewarded? I think this question is really important, and it's a real concern for a lot of our members who've been doing some fantastic work, that if it's all just about additionality, then you might as well just, take out that good work and reapply. And obviously that's the last thing anyone would want to happen. So how will DEFRA be able to reward those that are already doing good work?
No, it's a very good point, and we've been having ongoing discussions about exactly that, because what you wouldn't want is, which I think happened to a degree under the CAP, if you remember, people ploughed up their hedges in order then to get the grant to replant hedges. I in fact remember filming, I was a television reporter for a long time, I remember filming an orchard in Somerset that they grubbed out and got a grant for, and then over the other side of the road they got another grant to replant another orchard. So that is exactly what we don't want. And we're very mindful of this. So it is something that's definitely being factored in. But if you want to pass on some more of your thoughts on that, Mark, I think that would that would be welcomed.
Yeah, well, I mean, the policy team are very involved with your DEFRA team on the Elms side, so we will do that. And I think it's particularly an issue. My understanding is it's less of an issue around the biodiversity through Elms. From everything we're hearing, existing work will be rewarded. The issue becomes more of a challenge around carbon, where certainly in the private sector, it's all about additionality, because that's what you're paying for if you're selling something to the private sector.
But equally, you could say that where you've already got trees, building on those trees and adding to, would be very helpful in order to get your corridors, your wildlife corridors, and extending them. That will all be beneficial.
Now I know Elms isn't specifically your responsibility, but there's an interesting question here, or a concern from Robin Horton. We've already seen Elms be holed below the waterline as a new scheme has been mentioned to fill the gap of funding for those very worried landowners and farmers who see a huge financial gap between BPS and Elms. So will there be two schemes, or will Elms be radically changed to incorporate the new scheme and the funding? So this is I think what he's referring to, for those that aren't aware of it, is that there's discussions within DEFRA about a an interim, a stepping stone towards elm called SFI, or the Sustainable Farming Initiative. I don't know if it's a fair question to you how close you are to it, but this concern that the vision of elms is going to be is being changed.
I think people are sort of all getting very hooked up in it, and I suppose you can't blame them. Guesstimating what they think's going to happen.
Yep.
And in fairness, initially, although there will be a gap, it's only going to be a very small gap to start with, and then the schemes will kick in. Whatever their name is, they're all doing the same thing. They're all driving towards a more sustainable future for farming in all its different myriad ways, delivering public goods, and there will be plenty of options that everybody can clock into. And indeed, what we really want is them to do it, the real farmers, and to do it soon. And hopefully they'll want to do that, because that's how they'll get the funding. So I think people are perhaps, I suppose you can't blame them that they're anxious, but more detail will be coming out very soon, which hopefully will allay a lot of the concerns.
Yeah. No, I think you're quite right. It's that uncertainty that exists, and we were due to have something in September, and it's now going to be in November. But basic payment is going to start being reduced, on January the 1st, effectively, and elms doesn't start till the end of 24. So it's that we're getting quite close to the start of this transition, and it's just very, very big picture at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Also, I will say, one of the messages is that please apply for countryside stewardship, and if you're in it, stay in it, and if you're not, do try and get into it, because you'll be on the ladder, and you'll be doing all the kind of things that there'll be much more presumption in favour of.
Yeah. Just picking up on countryside stewardship, I've got a question that came in here, and it's a specific. I want to use it as an example to illustrate a real challenge that we have, they're not necessarily all your areas of responsibility, but it just illustrates it, about the problems of different agencies pushing against each other. And it's from a member who earlier this week contacted by a CLA member who farms what is very marginal land in West Yorkshire. He planted 70 acres, a large amount of woodland on this marginal land because it was doing the right thing, but Countryside Stewardship Woodland Grant Scheme, his claim was rejected, and it's going to due to receive a very large penalty, and it's all to do with timing, and he hadn't paid someone in time because his BPS hadn't come through and his higher level of stewardship being delayed. And he's £50,000 out of pocket. And this is for a small hill farmer. And the message, what should be a good news message, where as far as DEFRA is concerned, about significant tree planting on ground that would probably be ideally suited to trees. And yet, this guy it's going to be a real bad news story. And I guess it's the different, it's the RPA, the Forestry Commission, Natural England, not working together. If everything isn't done in exactly the right order, then penalties come in, and it just creates such. And obviously, we're going to follow up with this particular example in our Northern office. But it's getting the agencies to work together to try and help farmers and land managers rather than catch them out, because otherwise, this isn't just a chat in the pub. This will be a farmers' weekly. Isn't this ridiculous? And it just exacerbates the problem when really we're trying to get people to embrace countryside stewardship, to embrace tree planting, and so on. There's no right or wrong answer, but I just wondered what your views were as to how we can get the people who are delivering these agencies, thinking in the right direction.
Yes, you make a very good point, and I'm sorry to hear that gentleman's experience, and I can't obviously get involved in commenting on an individual case. But one of the things we're at pains to ensure is that the new system is so much simpler than the CAP, but also even indeed our own countryside stewardship. But a lot of that was also all linked to the requirements of the Common Agricultural Policy and all of that, and it's taught to us, a lot of it, and it does need to be simplified. But and we're all in agreement that the new system, a lot of work is going into that to make sure that it will be simpler, because we want people to join it, because we won't achieve our aims, and the farmers won't get the money if they don't want or can't, sign up to it. So all those messages have been learned and listened to, and the intention is that it will be a much simpler system going forward, and where necessary will involve advisors or people on the ground, that the people have got people to talk to about how to apply or whether this is right for them and those things.
Okay, thank you. Minister, I'm conscious of time, so probably just time for one more question, because you've been very generous with your time. And apologies, there've been huge numbers of questions flowing in. It's quite tricky to keep track of them, so apologies for people who I haven't picked up. But there's a water question, which is very much on your brief here, and it's from someone, Henry Cater, Chair of Water Resources East, so someone who knows a little bit about water. Water Resources East Limited are fully aware of the pressures on the availability of water in the east of England. If we are to tackle these issues, we need to adapt an integrated approach between farmers, land managers, water companies, and wildlife groups to deliver multi-stakeholder benefit. Can DEFRA help with the initial investment necessary to bring forward a comprehensive strategic plan to deliver a sustainable water supply and transfer system for the future?
Well, he sums it all up really, in that, that's how we do hope people will be working together. And it was one of the things that we've highlighted in our floods policy statement, is linking that issue of water supply with this whole issue at the other end of it, flooding. There is a connection, which relates to joining the whole of our water framework, our water landscape up together. And we do see catchment sensitive farming, for example, as being a way forward in this direction, where everybody works together on the water. Our nature-based solutions and this much wider catchment work are all linked up with it, and funding, this huge amount of funding towards flooding all relates to the water sector and the water scenario. So we're very keen that people do work together, the CLA, the EA, the water companies, the wildlife trusts. And I've actually been to see a number of projects where these things are working well in terms of water supply, in terms of also, like, for example, nitrates, which we haven't touched on, but I went to a really interesting project down in Havant, where land has been offset. The farmers not using so many fertilisers so that they can build the houses down the road, reduces the nitrates going into the water in the Solent. And that's a partnership working. And I do see a lot more of that. And the funding coming through all these different streams we've mentioned today, will also apply to some of those projects that relate to water. Okay.
We've got 2 more minutes. One final question.
I think I've gone over my time. So
okay, well then I will pause it there. Your camera's gone. Minister, thank you very much indeed for giving us your time. You're incredibly busy. Good luck with the Environment Bill, and thank you for your help, and thank you for answering all these questions so frankly.
Thank you very much. But remember, obviously, to keep working with us, because what we learn from you and how we work with you is absolutely invaluable. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand back to Anne, who's our host, who just had a few closing remarks.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much to you, Rebecca, for joining us today. I do hope that the audience have all enjoyed this, and it is very clear that land is key in delivering government environmental targets. And today's discussions only move to highlight the importance of the government working both with the CLA and landowners to ensure the best outcomes for all moving forward. Coming up next in November is our Rural Powerhouse Week, a digital event showcasing the strength and versatility of the rural economy. Subjects include future funding, trade, the road to net zero, and navigating the planning system. There will be keynote speakers as illustrated on the screen, and we hope to see you all there virtually. As always, please register for all of our events through the website. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.